And now, friends, on this holy day, let us gather in peace and unity. Let as one before the grace and grandeur of life, as children before its grace, great and loving mystery. In this hour, may we know anew the holy joy of human lives growing together, so that this hour will imbue all those to come with that same sacred awareness. Come, let us worship together.
Crazy Horse tells us, treat the earth well. It was not given to you by your parents. It was loaned to you by your children. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. When I started researching for my reflection for today, I tripped over President Biden's much under-publicized proclamation from October 31st. His proclamation continued a tradition of about 30 years that declared November to be Native American Heritage Month and November 25th to be Native American Heritage Day. I edited the proclamation for time, and I'm reading this part to encourage you to look for the complete proclamation and read it, and perhaps to make mention of it when you gather with friends and family at Thanksgiving. So, a proclamation on National Native American Heritage Month 2022. During National Native American Heritage Month, we celebrate Indigenous peoples past and present and rededicate ourselves to honoring tribal sovereignty, promoting tribal self-determination, and upholding the United States solemn trust and treaty responsibilities to tribal nations. America has not always delivered on its promise of equal dignity and respect for Native Americans. For centuries, broken treaties, dispossession of ancestral lands, and policies of assimilation and termination sought to decimate Native populations and their ways of life. But despite this painful history, Indigenous peoples, their governments, and their communities have persevered and flourished. We must do more to ensure that Native Americans have every opportunity to succeed and that their expertise informs our federal policymaking. I appointed Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland to be the first ever Native American Cabinet Secretary, and now more than 50 Native Americans serve in significant roles across the executive branch. Meanwhile, we are creating new jobs in Native American communities and bolstering infrastructure in tribal areas. We are empowering tribes to fight drought, improve fisheries, and transition to clean energy as part of the most significant climate investment this nation has ever made. We're also helping Native American communities heal from intergenerational trauma caused by past policies. Last year, the Department of the Interior launched a federal Indian boarding school initiative to shed light on the harmful history of forced cultural assimilation at these academic institutions. As we look ahead, my administration will continue to write a new and better chapter in the story of our nation-to-nation relationships. We will defend tribal sovereignty, self-government, self-determination, and the homeland of tribal nations. We will always honor the profound impact Native Americans continue to have in shaping our nation and bringing us closer to the more perfect union we know we can and must be. Now, therefore, I, Joseph R. Biden, President of the United States, do hereby proclaim November 2022 as National Native American Heritage Month. I urge all Americans, as well as their elected representatives at the federal, state, and local levels, to observe this month with appropriate programs, ceremonies, and activities, and to celebrate November 25th, 2022 as National American Heritage Day. I hope you're encouraged to find and read the rest of President Biden's proclamation and share it with family and friends. Thank you.
There was once a girl who went outside every day and stood in the forest. She went to more or less the same place at the same hour and was gone for the same amount of time. After the walk, she would return home and continue on with her day as though nothing had changed. However, on the few days when she couldn't make it to her forest for one reason or another, she seemed a little off balance, a little short-tempered, a little sour. Her father, who was the village rabbi, became curious about her habit, and one day he asked if he could go with her on her walk. She agreed, and the two of them set out together, crossing the field behind their house and entering the forest, walking deeper and deeper into the trees until they reached a small clearing. She stood in the middle of the clearing and took off her shoes, her feet sinking into the soft pine needles below. And she closed her eyes and took some deep breaths, the scent of pine, earth, and air filling her body. She then lifted her chin to the sky and began softly praying aloud. Her prayer was of gratitude for the earth and the life around her, for her family and friends, for her synagogue in town, for her cat and her dog and her fish. She finished her prayer and asked her father if he was ready to return home now. The father, the rabbi, said yes, but not before admiring his daughter's beautiful devotional life. He told her that it was wonderful that she did this, that he was proud of her, that he admired her. But he wondered why she went to the forest every day to pray, and why this particular place. The daughter replied that she comes here to talk to God and to listen. Her father, the rabbi, said that was perfectly fine, but that God was also everywhere, at home, in their house of worship, even in her heart and mind and body. You don't have to go anywhere in particular to pray, he said. God is the same everywhere. His daughter replied, yes, God is the same everywhere, but I'm not. The bones of this story, as I've usually come across it, is Jewish, but I've also seen similar tales in other faiths and traditions. Common is the idea that the young one knows that a sense of place can change us. Some places strike us with wonder and peace and allow us to create ourselves anew in the likeness of their embrace. She knew two things, that the holy was everywhere, as her father taught her, and that she would be able to hear and speak with the holy better in some places than others. While the earth is sacred, some lands were more sacred to her than others. She connected to some spaces better than others. She felt more at home in some spaces. Many of us understand this, for we have in our lives felt the embrace and beauty of some lands, some settings, some spaces more than others. This doesn't mean that some are more sacred than others. It just means that some mean more to us than others. I had the good fortune earlier this year to spend some time alone in the Southern California desert while on sabbatical. So that you don't get the wrong impression, this was no 40-day in the desert thing. It was not an extended and harsh period of deprivation and purification. I was not tempted by Satan, just an overindulgence on the kind of junk food that travel always seems to tempt me with. And I was aiming for comfort in this trip. I slept in a hotel and ate takeout from restaurants. But I did spend the better part of 2 or 3 days and one very late night in the Mojave Desert, driving around, walking around, sitting around, taking in the wide expanses, the mountains and the sand, the endless, small, tough, and unforgiving bushes and trees that made their way to life in that dry, dry land. Having never been in that sort of space, which is mostly why I went, I expected something barren, but it was full of life, just a different kind of life than I was accustomed to. And it was beautiful and seemed dangerous. And I left grateful and wanting to come back and visit some more. And I've spent a lot of time lately on trails and in forests and on smaller mountains, hours and hours sometimes on earth and in mud, under tree and above ravine, animals scurrying about, even a bear off the trails twice. Thankfully, both times I was not alone and the bears were not interested in us. I remember that the second bear was just sitting there in the dirt, curiously watching us while happily eating Doritos out of a bag that someone had left behind. I felt like I had found my spirit animal. But in the embrace of those trees and with extended time in that air and on that earth, I felt in my body a new kind of fullness and sense of connection with life. I always leave and go home, but that space stays with me and I with it. But my sacred land is the ocean, the beach, the salt, the birds, the waves, the tides, the endless balance and rhythms. I like the summer heat and the winter chill and the crabs and the grasses and the shells. It brings forth for me a sense of home and peace and quiet and joy that I do also feel in many other spaces, but never quite so impactfully as I do there at the shore. When it's been too long, I notice it. And I try to go back even for just a brief visit to reconnect and listen and sometimes speak. I get this from my father, who goes to the ocean in Virginia Beach almost every morning and posts photos and videos on Facebook almost daily of his visits. I look forward to them every morning. And when he doesn't post, I sometimes text him to find out why. I have very few uses for social media these days, but those images of the seagulls and the sunrise and those videos of the waves rolling in and those pictures of random dogs out there with their people who always seem to make their way to my dad, for he is a dog whisperer if there ever was one, allow me to start the day with balance and beauty. The images are sacred, not just for what they capture, but for how they come to me. And none of that is mine or belongs to me or anyone. It's space that I can visit and enjoy for as long as I can, and one day I will not be able to anymore, but it will still be there. The ocean will outlive us. The sands of the desert will be sand long after we're dust. The trails may change, but the earth upon which they're cleared will be there. Even those trees that help the girl in the story listen to and speak with God more devotionally will likely outlive her. At least many of them will. This is part of what makes these lands and spaces sacred, that they're not just for us. They're not ours. Through grace, we can enjoy them, but they weren't made for us and they don't exist for us. We directly experience them, which also makes them sacred. They become a part of us and we of them, but they transcend us as well. That balance of immanence and transcendence, of something that we directly experience that is also well beyond the size and scope of our lives, is the intersection of the sacred. To be sacred, it has to be beyond us and also within us. It must allow for transformation, but not possession. It can be received, but not bought. We can enjoy it, but not control it. We are out of balance with this theologically because of the problem of dominion. In some sense, Western creation stories often emphasize the idea that humans were created to subdue the earth and all beings on it. The idea is that we're favored with that prestige, but also burdened with its responsibilities. And that burden is met by owning, clearing, and using land as we wish without much, if any, concern for broader stewardship or those who are coming. Dominion over land then becomes, in human affairs, an issue of power and wealth, which creates harm and imbalance. And if that weren't bad enough, dominion over the land for the wealthy and powerful has, theologically and historically, led to a sense of dominion over people for the wealthy and powerful, particularly if those people are of the land that the powerful believes they must subdue. It's a short putt from subduing the land to subduing the people of the land. It's a short and evil putt that has led to genocide on these United States and elsewhere. And then this sense of dominion gets linked to Christian nationalism, that kind of dominionism, and it gets even worse. To be clear, these are all a little different. The scriptural foundation of subdue the earth and have dominion over it is not the same as modern nationalism, but that awful modern political theology has its roots in our spiritual DNA. And so we need to understand that in order to reject it. We are not here to have dominion over anyone. We are not here to subdue the earth. We're Unitarian Universalists. We're here to love the holy by serving one another in the world. The one another is everyone, especially the stranger, especially the outcast, especially the oppressed, preferentially those who are struggling, grieving in a bad way. And the world includes the earth and all beings, subduing none of it, rather serving it through stewardship small and large. We're here to love and serve, not subdue and hold dominion. Our power, strength, our glory, our beauty is determined by how well we love and serve one another in the world. Our power is one of blessing, not force. And it's this foundation that leads to things like land and people acknowledgements, which our racial justice ministry will speak about soon. One of the reasons for these sorts of statements that they'll describe and reflect upon in a religious community like ours is to counter the bad theology and dangerous political theology that is associated with our spiritual DNA. It expresses a different understanding of who we are and why we're here, one of service, love, and mutuality that counters the centuries of cascading pain and misery that are sourced in the misuse of biblical expressions of dominion. And we have to know it's there and understand it in order to counter it. If we want to confess, we have to know what we're confessing and root our honesty in self-examination. That comes through study and growth and prayer, and in this case, it can even come from other biblical passages that counter the kind of dominion thinking that has caused great problems, Or if you don't like what's on one page of the Bible, just turn the page. There's probably wisdom there that contains multitudes, and it may very well offer a better impression than what you just read. The problem is that the dominion stuff that has caused issues is right there at the beginning, and everyone reads that part. But dig deeper, do more work. God's voice is very different when sounded by the Hebrew prophets a little bit later on. That's what gave us king. Aside from confession, another value in this is the reimagining of a new understanding of who we are and how we got here. Many non-Western creation myths don't really have a deity standing on the outside creating things as separate from that deity. Many have creation occurring from within that deity. Creation comes from within God as a manifestation of God, so that we and everything are still a part of it. And thus, what we do to one another in the world, we do to the very body of God. We shouldn't romanticize this. People of these mythos still harm, still war, still commit unimaginable atrocities. We in the West, while aware or becoming aware of our sins, should not imagine as pristine a world that clearly wars in ways small and large everywhere and throughout time. Cruelty is not confined to one people, nor is kindness and compassion and love. But we can reimagine who we are and why we're here by replacing mythos around creation that involves dominion with mythos around creation that involves connection and community and mutuality. We can imagine ourselves as one body again, one holy body, separate neither from one another nor the holy itself. And then we can know who we are and faithfully acknowledge everyone else and move together as one body, without subduing anyone else, moving toward peace and love. The writer and land activist Wendell Berry once called the Bible an outdoor book. He was talking about how most of the important things that happen in the Bible happen outside, and implicitly comparing that with how often we read that book or any holy book while indoors. But what if we made that an outside practice, one that we engaged under the sky, in the grass, with the birds and the breeze and the bugs flying around us? What if we sought wisdom where wisdom so often resides, in, on, and among a land that is sacred for how it holds us and how it outlives us? It's like the girl in the story who prayed in the trees. Something about that sacred land made her devotion more profound and her life more balanced. She was different there, as we too might be, should we center ourselves in nature's grace and glory more often, as we might be if we sought the holy among the trees and the surf and the desert, as we might be if we place ourselves not above anyone or any land, but within a human community and ever-growing creation that graces us with life and one another. For the land of yesterday is sacred, and today and tomorrow too. And though we have not always honored that and will surely fail again, we can nonetheless turn toward mutuality and stewardship, toward honesty and justice, toward tomorrow and all those to come. Again and again, we can turn toward the good as we lessen our distance from our history, from one another, and from creation, as we grow closer in spirit and service and love. May it be so, and amen. And we now turn to a liturgy of land and people acknowledgements led by the Indigenous Peoples Concerns Group of our Racial Justice Ministry. I believe the first person up is Francis Prestiani.
In preparing the land and people acknowledgements, we worked with Trinity Norwood of the Lenni-Lenape Nation. Trinity could not be with us this morning, but sent this blessing to the congregation to recognize our work. So these are Trinity's words. Land acknowledgements are becoming increasingly popular, and often I get the question of why they are important, relevant, or what purpose they serve. A land acknowledgement honors the land you are on, whether physically, spiritually, or in today's world, often virtually. And I don't believe that you can honor the land unless you acknowledge the true history of the land. Recognizing the history ties us all to it, the domino effect that started before we were even born, that has brought us to now, all sharing in this very moment. A land acknowledgement requires us to think about where we are outside of our own little worlds and take in what's around us. They can require listeners to recognize that my ancestors are not from some distant mystical stories you may have read about in a classroom, but the people who made the foundations of the world we are experiencing right now. Some of the roads you drove down in your cars to get here today were once Lenape walking trails. Some of the local parks we visit are landmarks of where Lenni-Lenape leaders signed treaties or created villages or fought for their very existence. Additionally, a land acknowledgement honors the notion that Lenape people are still here, and we have continued relationship with this land. We are not a museum exhibit stuck in time. We have not just survived, but strived and honor our ancestors and traditions by staying connected to this land. The final aspect of a land acknowledgement is my favorite. It's hope. It is the hope that everyone here in Lenape-Hoking, all from different tribes, backgrounds, walks of life, and nations, honor my ancestors by honoring this land and practice being good to this land, the creatures that inhabit it, and the people living on it. Wanishi, thank you. And it's signed Trinity, Happy Dancing Norwood, Nanticoke, Lenni-Lenape Nation of New Jersey.
Trinity's words end with hope. And I have 3 hopes today. I hope that preparing and using the land and people acknowledgements is not a box that we check off as a congregation. It's something we did to show that we're anti-racist. For many of us, dealing with racism is a bit of an intellectual thing. What do I need to learn or do? How quickly can I get it done? And once I've accomplished that, I can check it off my list. But a land and people acknowledgement is not a box to check off. Paula Palmer, who offers workshops about towards right relationship with Native peoples, notes that honoring a territory becomes meaningful when it is the basis for building relationships with Indigenous peoples in the land. So my second hope is that our understanding of this acknowledgement results in a deeper understanding of Indigenous peoples. My work in 2019 regarding Indigenous peoples started with thinking, an intellectual approach, and I thought maybe our racial justice ministry at UUCP could help create an Indigenous Peoples Day for the state of New Jersey. But Reverend Bill asked, is that something Indigenous peoples in New Jersey want? What? I should talk with them, find out what they care about? I didn't even know any Indigenous people. And just finding Indigenous people in New Jersey would take time. I didn't know if I had the time to do that. Well, in January 2020, I went to Mahwah, New Jersey, and spoke with Petra Toms, who was the director of the Ramapo-Lenape Indian Nation Community Center, and she introduced me to Chief Dwayne Perry. No, they did not care much about an Indigenous Peoples Day. That might be helpful, but they were concerned about 4 things. 1, local people in New Jersey were suing them because they wanted some of the Ramapo land for playing polo. 2, the contamination of water in Ringwood, New Jersey, because of the many years Ford stored cans of chemicals in the caves in the mountains where their community center was. 3, they were concerned that most non-Native Americans know little about the history of Indigenous peoples in the United States. And Petra asked me, do you know about the doctrine of discovery? No. Do you know about manifest destiny? No. Do you know what happened to the Lenni-Lenape that lived for thousands of years in what we now call New Jersey before being pushed out of the area? No. And 4th, they wanted help to promote their annual powwows. I kind of thought powwows were entertainment like a circus. My ignorance, because powwows are their vehicle for educating New Jerseyans about who they are. They're about their culture and beliefs. They put on ceremonial wear, not costumes. And powwows are to let us know they are still here, living in New Jersey. My third hope is that the land and people acknowledgements lead to better relationships, to building relationships with Indigenous peoples in New Jersey. So how can we get to know Indigenous people in New Jersey? I got to know Petra Tomes through the UUA at a conference they held on racism. And I got to know Reverend Dr. John Norwood and Trinity Norwood, his daughter, through Pendle Hill, a Quaker conference center, when I attended a bunch of online workshops on building right relationships with Indigenous people. Reverend Norwood is a minister of the Ujima Village Christian Church in Ewing, next door to us. Trinity lives in Moorestown, New Jersey. They are members of the Nanticoke Lenni-Lenape Nation, which is headquartered in Bridgeton, New Jersey. Here are things that I think could help lead us to building relationships with Indigenous people. Read the Land and People Acknowledgement at your family's Thanksgiving gathering this year. Learn Indigenous people's history in the United States and teach your children or your grandchildren US history more honestly. Go visit the Nanticoke Lenni-Lenape Trading Post in Bridgeton. Subscribe to their newsletter. Listen to their weekly blogs. Find out more about the Nanticoke Lenni-Lenape Museum they hope to create. Attend powwows. Learn about the New Jersey Division of Indian Affairs, made up of representatives of the 3 tribes here in New Jersey. It meets in Trenton. Join organizations like the Coalition for Natives and Allies. Ask, how might we help remove the over 70 Native American symbols still used as mascots in New Jersey schools? Mark Charles, who is Navajo, says that you create community by creating shared memories. You create community by creating shared memories. I hope our dedication of this land and people acknowledgement today leads us to creating shared memories with the Indigenous people who are here still in New Jersey.
Good morning, I'm Ted Fetter, privileged to read the Land and People Acknowledgement for our congregation while sitting at Reverend Bill Neely's desk. The land and waterways upon which the congregants of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Princeton gather and live are the ancestral and unceded Lenape-Hoking territory of the Lenni-Lenape people or nations. Colonialists from outside countries, including ancestors of some of us, came and forced many of these people to move west and north after living here for thousands of years. We honor those in the diaspora, as well as those who continue to live in the area we now call New Jersey. The Nanticoke Lenni-Lenape Tribal Nation, the Ramapo Lenape Nation, and the Powhatan Lenape Nation, the Nanticoke of Millsboro, Delaware, and the Lenape of Cheswold, Delaware. We acknowledge descendants who continue to live here on their homeland. We honor their presence and contributions of their ancestors. We strive to increase our understanding, deepen our relationships, and celebrate these nations. In our acknowledgement of the continued presence of Lenape people in their homeland, we affirm the aspiration of Lenape Chief Tamanend that there be harmony between the indigenous people of this land and the descendants of the immigrants to this land, as long as the rivers and creeks flow and the sun, moon, and stars shine.
Please join me in the responsive reading, Native Peoples, Our Faith and Our Commitment. We join together to acknowledge that we in the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Princeton gather and live on land that is the unceded territory of the Lenni-Lenape people.
We pledge ourselves to recognize the worth and dignity of every person.
We recognize that Native Americans are still here among us, still part of the community in which we live.
We pledge ourselves to creating shared experiences of peace, liberty, and justice for all.
We understand that Indigenous people have great respect for this land, water, fire, and air, the natural environments that supports, sustain, and nurtures us all.
We pledge ourselves to care for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part.
We will work to understand Indigenous peoples and build relationships with them.
We pledge ourselves to build the beloved community in our families, our congregation, our neighborhoods, our nation, and the world. We affirm the hope of the Lenape chief Tamanend that there be a harmony between the Indigenous people of this land and the descendants of the immigrants to this land, as long as the rivers and creeks flow and the sun, moon, and stars shine.
Go forth grateful for the moments before you, the breath within you, and the people among you, and the Spirit guiding you toward lives of greater love and kindness. And go forth knowing that you are held always and always with everyone else by that great love of no beginning and never ending. Go in peace, and amen.